Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
Christmas used to be a lot louder in our house, with too many pies burning in the oven and cheap decorations sagging from every corner of the ceiling, and Dad yelling over the football game while Mom tried to herd the chaos into something resembling a family dinner. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't clean, it definitely wasn't picture perfect, but it was ours. I remember laughing until my sides hurt, picking tinsel out of my hair days later, and feeling, at least for a little while, like I belonged somewhere real and messy and unbreakable. This year, though, it was different. This year, the lights on the tree looked too carefully arranged, the table setting too stiff, the fake smile stretched a little too thin. It was like walking into a department store's holiday display, pretty enough to take a picture of, but hollow if you stayed too long. I hung my coat on the rack by the door, noticing how Mom didn't even glance up, too busy fixing the hem of the white linen tablecloth, like a wrinkle in the fabric was more important than the daughter who'd driven 5 hours through snow just to be here. The usual buzz of chatter was missing, replaced by polite clinks of silverware and Travis's obnoxious laugh that boomed louder than anything else in the room. Travis, my cousin, who at 35 was still bouncing between career opportunities and needed to find himself, had somehow slid into the family like an uninvited guest nobody had the guts to kick out. He was sitting at the head of the table now, telling a loud story about how he almost closed some big business deal, while Dad and Mom nodded along like he was some kind of celebrity. I took my seat across from him, next to the cold spot where my brother used to sit before he stopped coming around. Couldn't blame him, really. Some people know when to cut their losses. I guess I just held out hope longer than most. Mom buzzed around the kitchen, carrying a roasted turkey so dry it looked like it might crumble into dust if anyone dared to touch it. Her eyes kept flicking over to Travis, like she was waiting for him to say the right thing, to make the right move. Dad, meanwhile, just kept sipping from his glass, one of the good crystal ones they never used unless they were trying to impress somebody. Jessica, Mom called sweetly, snapping me out of my daze, would you mind helping with the rolls? She handed me a basket as if offering a consolation prize, like I was 7 years old again and needed to be given something small to keep my hands busy. Of course, Mom, I said, smiling so hard my cheeks hurt. I took the basket and placed it carefully on the table, noticing how every single seat had a little name card this year, something we had never, ever done before. Mine was written in smaller letters, tucked at the far end. Travis's card, in bold, was smack in the center next to Mom. I guess even dinner seating had a pecking order now, and I was somewhere near the chicken coop floor. As we all sat down, passing dishes around with mechanical smiles, I caught the loaded glances passing between Mom and Dad. They looked like people about to spring a surprise party, but the kind nobody actually wanted. Mom smoothed her napkin across her lap 3 times in a row, a nervous tick I remembered from when she used to gear up to tell me I couldn't go to that college I worked so hard to get into because it was too far away and too expensive, even though I had the scholarships to cover almost everything. Dad cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably in his chair, and I knew something was coming. Something bigger than dry turkey and store-bought pies. You know, Dad started, voice a little too loud. We've been thinking a lot about the future lately. Mom nodded, reaching over and squeezing his hand, her rings flashing under the too bright overhead lights. Travis leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, smirking like he already knew the punchline to a joke the rest of us hadn't heard yet. I took a sip of my wine, feeling the acid bite of it, and tried to keep my face neutral. Tried to pretend I didn't feel the slow burn of rage already crawling up my spine. Family is what matters most, Mom added, her voice trembling just slightly, like she was performing in front of a very judgmental audience. And sometimes we have to make hard decisions that are for the good of everyone involved. It was almost funny, in a sick kind of way, how they kept dancing around it, like a boxer too scared to throw the first real punch. I wanted to stand up, slam my hands on the table, scream at them to just spit it out already, but I didn't. I just sat there, smiling, feeling the envelope tucked neatly into my purse like a loaded gun I was waiting for the right moment to fire. "You know, Jess," Mom said, voice syrupy and fake, "you've always been so strong. So independent. We are just so proud of everything you've done." The words were sharp, cutting deeper than any insult could. I didn't need their pride. I needed their loyalty, and apparently, that had a limit. I felt Dad's eyes on me, heavy with something like guilt but too watered down to really count. Travis was still smirking, tapping his fingers on the table like he was counting down to some grand reveal. I set my wine glass down carefully, aligning it perfectly with the fork beside my plate, and smiled back at them. A slow, patient smile that said, "Go ahead. Make your move." Mom picked up her glass of wine, her hand shaking just the slightest bit, and stood up. The room quieted instantly, even Travis straightening up a little, sensing the gravity of the moment. "We have an important announcement to make," she said, and the room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing closer, the lights dimming even though nothing had changed except everything. And just like that, the real Christmas began. Mom was practically glowing, the kind of glow you usually only see when someone thinks they've pulled off something grand and expects a standing ovation for it, and when she raised her wine glass in one hand and clinked it lightly against her ring. The sound was so sharp it felt like it cracked the air clean in two. "We've been doing a lot of thinking," she said, her voice high and sweet like the fake frosting on one of those supermarket cakes nobody really wants to eat, but everyone pretends tastes great anyway. "And we realized it's time to make some big changes for the future of this family." I leaned back slightly in my chair, feeling the hardwood press against my spine, and I could almost taste the announcement before she even said it, because when you grow up being the second choice, you learn pretty quickly when the axe is about to fall. Dad cleared his throat again, his hand reaching out absently for his glass like he needed something to hold on to, but he didn't say a word because he never did when it really mattered. And Travis looked around the table with a smug little twitch to his lips like he already knew he was about to come out ahead. Mom's smile widened, her cheeks flushing a little, and she said it so casually, like she was mentioning that we were switching brands of laundry detergent instead of gutting me right there at the Christmas dinner table. "We've decided," she said brightly, "that we're going to be giving your inheritance to Travis instead. He needs it more." There it was, dropped into the middle of the room like a lead weight nobody knew how to lift, and for a second, the only sound was the faint ticking of the big gaudy clock over the fireplace that had belonged to Grandma before she died and left everything else to Mom. Trusting her to do the right thing, what a joke that turned out to be. I looked at Dad, waiting for some kind of protest, some small flicker of decency, but he just nodded like a damn bobblehead, not even able to meet my eyes, and Travis let out a low, fake humble chuckle like he was embarrassed, but not really, because deep down, he probably thought he deserved it just as much as they were saying. For a second, just one burning hot second, I thought about flipping the table right into Travis's smug face, watching the turkey, the mashed potatoes, the gravy boat explode all over his stupid, expensive sweater, but instead I just smiled, that tight, brittle smile that had kept me alive in this family longer than anything else. "Wow," I said, my voice perfectly level. That's really something." Mom beamed at me like I had just agreed to bake cookies for a church bake sale, not like she had just announced she was cutting me out of my own future because Travis needed it more. "You've always been so successful," she chirped, reaching across the table like she might actually touch my hand before thinking better of it. "You've made a good life for yourself. Travis just needs a little help getting started." The words hit harder than they should have because it was like every Christmas, every birthday, every goddamn soccer game they missed because they were too busy bailing Travis out of whatever mess he had landed and had been building up to this moment. This final insult wrapped up in shiny paper and tied with a bow. "You know," I said, swirling my wine slowly in my glass, "I had been working my tail off for 15 years straight, 5 years at college, and then 8 years at the law firm." I paused for effect, letting the wrong math just hang there in the air, a baited hook for anyone sharp enough to catch it and say something in the comments later, because if there was one thing I knew about people, it's that they loved catching mistakes almost as much as they loved watching a train wreck in slow motion. Mom gave me a tight smile like she didn't really hear me, too wrapped up in her own performance to notice much of anything anymore, and Dad just stared down into his plate like maybe he thought if he stayed real quiet, he could disappear altogether. I took another sip of wine and let myself drift back to all the times Travis got second, third, 10th chances while I was expected to stand on my own 2 feet with no complaints. To all the nights I stayed up studying while Travis crashed on some friend's couch after blowing his rent money at a bar. To all the times I was told you're strong, Jessica, when what they really meant was you're on your own, Jessica. Travis leaned forward now, like he couldn't help himself, his voice dripping fake sincerity. I just really appreciate you understanding, he said. I mean, family's about lifting each other up, right? I could almost admire the audacity of it, the way he spun the knife and smiled while he twisted it, but I was too busy gripping the envelope under the table, feeling the thick, crinkling weight of it between my fingers like a lifeline. Of course, I said, matching his smile beat for beat. Family's everything. The silence that followed was thick, the kind that crackles with static, everyone waiting for me to cry or scream, or maybe just storm out so they could feel justified in saying I was the difficult one, the dramatic one, the one who couldn't handle a little tough love. Instead, I reached down casually into my purse, my fingers brushing over the smooth leather, and pulled out the envelope, thick and heavy and full of the kind of truth you only unleash when you are absolutely, 100%, done pretending. I laid it gently on the table in front of me, tapping it once with a single finger, the sound echoing louder than it should have in the stunned silence. That's funny, I said, my voice sweet and deadly, because I already know. And just like that, Mom's smile froze, the color drained from Dad's face, and Travis leaned back like he had just realized the chair he was sitting in might not be so stable after all. The second the envelope hit the table with that soft, accusing thud, you could almost hear the panic set in, like a low hum underneath the forced smiles and stiff bodies, because deep down they all knew, they had to know, that I was not the kind of girl who would sit quietly and take it anymore. Mom blinked rapidly like she was trying to clear a smudge she could not wipe away. Dad's mouth opened and closed like he wanted to say something but had forgotten how, and Travis, poor dumb Travis, looked from me to the envelope like maybe if he stared long enough, it would just catch fire and save him the trouble. I smiled wider, the kind of smile that used to come right before I got sent to my room for having an attitude, the kind that had kept me alive through more family dinners than I cared to count. I picked up the envelope with both hands, feeling the familiar weight of it, and started speaking in that calm, friendly tone people use when they are about to cut you off at the knees. You know, I said, sliding my chair back just a little so I could see all of them clearly. It's funny how things work out. Because for months now, I had this little feeling, this itch in the back of my mind, telling me something was off. Mom shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her wine glass trembling slightly in her fingers, and Dad finally found the courage to lift his eyes to mine. But there was no fire there, no anger, just a sad, wilted sort of fear. I started noticing things last summer, I continued, my voice light and almost playful, like we were reminiscing about old family vacations instead of tearing each other's lives apart. The weird conversations that stopped the second I walked into a room. The bills addressed to me that never made it into my hands. The phone calls you thought I couldn't hear. Travis huffed a little, a weak, half-hearted sound like a dying engine sputtering out its last breath, but I ignored him because he wasn't the real threat here. He never had been. Travis was a weapon, not the hand that wielded it. I found Mom's laptop open one night when I came by to drop off those groceries you asked for, I said, pausing long enough to let the image sink in, and guess what I found? Mom opened her mouth, probably to deny everything, but I held up one finger, silencing her with the same gesture she used to use on me when I was a kid being too emotional. I found emails, I said, letting the words hang heavy in the air. Emails between the two of you and dear sweet Travis here, planning the whole thing. Step by step. How you were going to transfer the trust fund to him. How you were going to justify it by saying he needed it more. Dad let out a noise, almost a groan, but it was too little, too late. At first, I said, tapping the envelope lightly against the palm of my hand, I thought maybe I could fix it. Maybe if I just confronted you, we could have an honest conversation like normal people. But then I realized something. I leaned forward, voice dropping into something colder, something sharper. Turns out, I said, with a dry laugh, when you treat your daughter like a doormat long enough, eventually, she starts wiping her feet somewhere else. The room felt suffocating now, the smell of turkey and stale wine curling in my nose like something rotting, and for a second I just sat there, enjoying the silence, the horror stretching between us like a rubber band pulled to its breaking point. So, I said brightly, sliding my thumbnail under the envelope's flap, I did what any reasonable adult would do. I hired a lawyer. Travis snorted, a short, bitter sound, and muttered something under his breath, but I ignored him because that part was the sweetest. Not just any lawyer, not some back-office pushover who would file a complaint and send a strongly worded letter. No, I hired Amy Price, the most vicious, bloodthirsty financial attorney this side of the state line, a woman who made corporate CEOs cry into their overpriced whiskey and go home to hide under their custom-made comforters. Amy had walked me through everything, every loophole, every buried clause, every single dirty little secret they thought I would never be smart enough to figure out. Turns out, they had made mistakes, lots of them, starting years ago when they began siphoning little bits out of the trust, calling them loans they never intended to repay, covering up Travis's gambling debts, buying him new cars, even putting a down payment on that ugly condo he crashed in between business ventures. And funny thing about trust funds, I said, smiling sweetly, you mess with them enough, and you're not just looking at civil penalties. You're looking at fraud. Serious, jail-time fraud. Mom let out a soft gasp, her face going pale beneath her carefully applied foundation, and Dad's hand shook so badly that his wine sloshed over the rim of his glass, staining the white tablecloth deep red, like blood spreading across snow. And the best part, I said, savoring the way Travis's cocky smirk was crumbling into something desperate and ugly, is that I already moved what was left. Legally. Quietly. Months ago. For a second, nobody moved, nobody breathed, the only sound the slow, deliberate tearing of paper as I opened the envelope and let the contents slide onto the table. It wasn't just the lawyer's letter. That would have been too easy, too clean. No, what tumbled out onto the pristine tablecloth was something worse. Much worse. Photocopies. Bank statements. Old checks. Emails printed out in black and white. All of it. A breadcrumb trail leading straight to every lie they had told, every secret they had buried, every selfish choice they had made under the illusion that I would always be too loyal, too stupid, or too scared to do anything about it. Mom reached for one of the papers with a shaking hand, scanning it frantically, her mouth working silently like she was trying to summon some excuse, some explanation, but there was nothing left to say. I leaned back in my chair, arms folded, and watched them squirm. Because this was just the beginning. And I had all night. The papers lay scattered across the table like dirty laundry dumped out for everyone to see, and for a long, stretching moment, nobody said a damn thing, because what could they even say when every ugly secret they had been hiding for months, maybe even years, was right there, bleeding all over Mom's carefully ironed tablecloth. The fire crackled faintly in the background, a pathetic, struggling sound against the dead weight of the silence pressing down on all of us, and I took my time picking up my wine glass, swirling the deep red liquid thoughtfully, like I had all the time in the world to savor their slow, agonizing realization. Travis was the first to move, of course, because he was always the one who thought running his mouth fast enough could outrun the truth, but tonight he was tripping over his own tongue, his face blotchy and red like he had been slapped. "This isn't what it looks like," he said, voice cracking, and I almost laughed right there at the table because if that line was good enough for a bad soap opera, it sure as hell wasn't good enough for me. "Oh, really?" I said, raising an eyebrow, feeling the old, familiar spark of rage and vindication stirring in my chest. "Because it looks exactly like a record of every dollar you stole from me, with a little help from our loving parents." Mom made a soft keening sound, like a kettle boiling over, her hands twisting the napkin in her lap until the fabric was a mangled mess, and for a second, I almost felt sorry for her, but only for a second. Because memories have a nasty way of stacking up fast when you give them room to breathe. I remembered every ignored birthday, every broken promise, every time I was told to be the bigger person because Travis was going through a hard time while I sat alone, wondering why doing everything right never seemed to be enough. Dad finally found his voice, low and rough like gravel under a truck tire, and he said, "Jess, sweetheart, we didn't mean for it to go this far," and the lie was so thin and obvious it almost disintegrated in the air before it finished leaving his mouth. "You meant it exactly this far," I said, setting my glass down carefully, savoring the click of it against the wood. "You just didn't think I would ever catch you." Travis shoved back from the table so hard his chair toppled over with a loud clatter, and he pointed at me with a trembling finger like a man trying to hold back a hurricane with a paper umbrella. "You're blowing this out of proportion," he shouted, spit flying from his lips. "It was just some help. Family helps family." "Funny," I said, cocking my head slightly because from where I'm sitting, it looks a hell of a lot like fraud. Mom gasped again, clutching at Dad's arm like he was going to suddenly grow a backbone and fix this disaster, but he just sat there, looking about 100 years old, defeated before the fight even started. Maybe he knew, deep down, that I had already won. I reached out and tapped one of the papers, the one with the biggest numbers highlighted in neat yellow stripes, the one that showed exactly how much of my trust fund had been siphoned away to cover Travis's gambling debts, failed business ventures, and God knows what else. "This," I said softly, "is enough for civil court, at the very least." Their faces paled further, but I didn't stop, not now, not after years of being told to keep my voice down and be grateful for scraps. "But depending on how generous I'm feeling," I added, savoring the way their horror bloomed fresh and raw, "it could easily be criminal." For a second, Travis looked like he might lunge across the table at me, but then he must have realized that, even if he did, all he would find waiting for him was a police report and a court summons. Instead, he whirled around, stomping toward the door, muttering a string of curses that made Mom flinch with every word. "This is bullshit," he shouted over his shoulder. "This is fucking bullshit." "Language, Travis," I called after him sweetly, watching with satisfaction as he slammed the front door so hard that one of the picture frames rattled off the wall and shattered on the hardwood floor. Mom was crying openly now, silent tears streaking her foundation, her whole body trembling like a leaf caught in a hurricane, and Dad looked like he wanted to follow Travis out the door but didn't have the guts to move. I almost felt sorry for them, sitting there amid the wreckage they had built with their own hands, but then I remembered the way Mom had smiled when she announced she was giving my future away like it was a Christmas present for someone else, and the sympathy shriveled up and died inside me. "I want you to understand something," I said, my voice clear and cold, slicing through the heavy air. "This isn't just about money. This is about every single time you looked at me and saw nothing but a backup plan. This is about every time you let him screw up and told me to be the good one, the strong one." Mom whimpered something that might have been my name, but I didn't stop, because for once, they were going to hear every damn word. "I gave you years to do the right thing," I said, leaning forward slightly, feeling the fire behind me warm my back while the coldness in front of me only grew sharper. "And you made your choice." Dad rubbed a hand over his face, his wedding ring glinting briefly under the harsh light, and he finally said, "Jess, please, we can fix this. We can make this right." You had your chance, I said simply, pushing my chair back with a low scrape against the floor, standing up slowly, every movement deliberate and heavy with finality. I picked up my wine glass again, swirling the last mouthful lazily, and took a slow, savoring sip, letting the bitter flavor settle on my tongue like victory. You should have picked a smarter golden child, I said, setting the empty glass down carefully and walking away without a single glance back at the wreckage I was leaving behind. Because I knew, in the deepest part of myself, that some bridges aren't just burned. Some bridges are meant to be blown to hell, so you never even think about crossing back again. The door closed behind me with a soft, almost apologetic click, not the dramatic slam you might expect after the kind of scene we had just staged inside, and as I stepped out into the biting cold, the air hit me hard. Sharp enough to clear away some of the leftover anger, but not sharp enough to wash away everything else. The snow was still falling, slow and lazy, thick flakes drifting down from a black sky, and for a second I just stood there on the front steps, my breath fogging up around my face, feeling strangely hollow. Like someone had reached into my chest and scooped out everything I thought would be left standing after a fight like that. Behind me, through the thin walls of the house I had once called home without hesitation, I could still hear faint sounds, Mom sobbing, Dad mumbling something in that broken, useless voice of his, maybe the two of them trying to pick up the pieces, maybe just sitting in the wreckage, too stunned to move. I thought about how many Christmases we had crammed into that living room. Too many, really. Cheap ornaments hanging by frayed threads, laughter always a little too loud, the smell of burning pie crust drifting out of the kitchen, and how, despite everything, a part of me had kept thinking we could get back to that if I just tried hard enough. But now, standing there with the snow soaking into my boots and the cold crawling up under my coat, it was clear we were never going back, and maybe we never had been headed there in the first place. Maybe that version of us had only ever existed in my head, a trick of the light I kept chasing because it was easier than admitting that the foundation had been rotten for a long, long time. I started walking slowly down the driveway, my boots crunching against the thin layer of ice that had formed since I arrived, and every step felt heavier than the last even though my body was lighter, freer. Unburdened by the constant need to smile through the cracks or swallow down the things that should have been shouted years ago. I wondered if this was what winning felt like, this strange, echoing emptiness, like I had traded one kind of cage for another, built this one with my own hands, and locked the door behind me. The driveway stretched out in front of me longer than it ever seemed before, the streetlights flickering against the thick curtains of snow, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the faint, tinny sounds of Christmas music spilling from another house. Someone else's happy holiday that I was walking away from, step by careful step. I thought about turning around, just for a second, thought about glancing back at the windows to see if they were watching me leave, but I didn't, because part of growing up, part of really letting go, is learning that the people who let you down once will probably let you down again, and it's no good begging ghosts to change their ways. I thought about Travis, about how he would spin the story to make himself the victim like he always did. How Mom would cradle him and smooth his hair back and whisper that everything would be okay while Dad stared out the window pretending not to notice the money bleeding out of their lives. I thought about how maybe, deep down, they would never even understand what they had done, that to them I would always be the difficult one, the one who didn't know how to forgive, the one who turned Christmas into a war zone. My car sat at the edge of the driveway, dusted in a thin sheet of snow, and I wiped it off with my sleeve, the cold soaking straight into my bones, but I welcomed it because it felt real in a way nothing else had tonight. I climbed in, started the engine, and let the heater roar to life while I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel, staring out at the frozen street ahead, wondering what the hell came next. Because the truth was, revenge felt good in the moment. It always does. It's bright and sharp and sweet on the tongue like the first bite of forbidden fruit, but it does not last. It leaves something behind. A bitter taste you cannot scrub out no matter how much you want to. I had exposed them, embarrassed them, hurt them exactly the way they had hurt me, and still there was this hole inside me, this gnawing, uneasy feeling that maybe by tearing them down, I had torn something out of myself too. I thought about calling my brother, thought about telling him everything, but what was the point? He had left years ago, he had seen the rot before I had and saved himself, and maybe that was the smartest thing anyone in our family ever did. Maybe he knew that some things are better abandoned than rebuilt, that loyalty without respect is just another kind of trap. The snow kept falling, heavier now, thick enough that the world beyond my headlights blurred into soft, ghostly shapes, and I thought about the future, about what it would feel like to go to sleep tonight knowing I was truly, completely alone. I thought about holidays spent with other people's families, borrowed traditions, smiles that would never quite reach the parts of me that had been broken in this house long before tonight. I tapped my fingers against the steering wheel, feeling the leather cold and stiff under my skin, and said it out loud, just to hear how it sounded when it wasn't bouncing around in my own head. Family's supposed to be forever, right? The words hung there for a second, heavy and final. Funny, forever feels a lot like goodbye. I put the car into drive, easing forward into the night, the taillights fading into the snowstorm behind me, no footprints left, no path back, just the long, open road stretching ahead, silent and waiting. Whether I was the hero or the villain, whether I had saved myself or just burned down the last place that had ever been home, I would figure that out later. Maybe some stories are not meant to have clean endings. Maybe some ghosts are meant to follow you, no matter how far you run.